Hiya, welcome to Software for Technical Theater. We're going to go over layers today and just the basics, how to access them, where they are, how properties work, and then we'll spend a little bit of time putting a pre-existing drawing onto some logical layers. Okay, the first thing when you get into AutoCAD is that you have to go find your layers, and the layers panel on the ribbon is right here. It might be in a slightly different location on your machine, but typically that's not where I spend most of my time. I want to be able to see what all of the layers are at the same time, and for that we need the Layer Properties Manager, and you can bring that up by typing layers or just layer and then hitting enter. You could also click on this button to bring up this this panel. Typically this would not be docked when you first open it, but because I have opened it before, it docked it. But if it pops it out like this, it's very easy to dock. You just click on this bar right here, drag to one side or the other, and put it wherever you think is most useful for you. I personally also like to bring up my properties layer, and you can do that by bringing up, not layer, properties bar, tab, manager, whatever. And you just type properties and then hit enter. And we're going to want to dock this one as well. Like that. Lovely. You might have to fuss with those a little bit to get them to look the way that you want. If you have a large enough monitor, you can absolutely leave this open and it doesn't really impact your workflow. If you're working on a small monitor like on a laptop, you might want to have these auto dock or whatever you call it, and you just click that button, and now to access those you just hover. I'm going to leave mine open for now. Properties, open, there we go. Oh, why did it do that? Whatever. Okay, so you'll notice when you first come into the drawing, unless you have layers that are already established, which you might depending on what template you're using, you're going to be on layer 0. As I mentioned on the PowerPoint of this, you usually want to go ahead and create something other than your 0 layer to work on. Just best practice, don't work on your 0 layer. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to name a layer 0 working. Hit enter to accept, and then I'm going to double click to make that active. So you can see the check mark just clicked over to this one. So now when I draw something, let's just give myself a line to look at. Lovely. This is on the working layer, and I can see that up here as well as here because it's highlighted, and down here in my properties. So there's a bunch of different places you can look at it. One thing that I like to do is when you start using 3D and some other stuff, you start to tend to pay less attention to this, or maybe you're on your annotation tab, or maybe you're somewhere else. But I like to put my layers up here in that quick access toolbar. You do that by clicking on this down arrow, click layer, and now this is also here. So even if I don't have this popped up or this popped up, I can still change it there. Great. So let's just start playing with some of the properties here. You'll notice that all of the properties here are listed as by layer. What that means is that this line, the one that I have selected, is going to behave in whatever way the layer does. And in general, that's the way that you want to keep it. There are a few situations where I would say, like, yeah, go ahead and change it in your properties, but in general, you want to make changes in your Layer Properties Manager. So let's just start with something simple. Let's change that color from, let's say, white to green. Why not? And you can see that as soon as I clicked yes, it changed that color right there. Line type is just the kind of like what the line looks like. So if I click load, I have to go and tell it that I want to use it, because you can see that there's all of these different kinds of lines. So you have to go load it first and then select it. So let's say that we want this to be a hidden line. I can go down here, select hidden, click OK. And now before I click out of this box, I need to select hidden. And once I did that, you can see that that changed its style. You can change the line weights. Right now my line weights are set to millimeters. They can be set to whatever. And they could also be set to inches. So let's say that I want a really thick line here, 1 millimeter. I click on that and, I don't see it. That's because in order to see it, you have to have line weights selected. So to do that, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to click line weight. And this is going to change it to display line weight. So now that change is visible here as well. Lovely. Let's go ahead and put that back to the default because, whoa, that's beefy. All right, there we go. You can also change transparency. So let me do another line here. So similar line, but if I change, I'm going to give myself a new layer as well. Let's change this back to continuous. Oh, that's not even on the right layer yet. That's okay. And you know what? Let's go ahead and change. Let's leave the color where it is so we can see the difference in color. And I'm going to put this onto my new layer. And I'm going to change the transparency here. So let's make it 50% transparent. Deselect, and you can see that it looks dimmer. Let's change that to an even higher number, 90. And it is barely visible. In fact, it's almost completely gone. So that's just transparency, and it would indeed be transparent if I had a solid over top of it. But I don't, and that's fine. This can be really useful if you have drawings, lines on top of lines on top of lines. Although the usefulness of it, I don't know. It's more about how you visualize it than about, usefulness or whatever. But it can be useful. Let's set that back to, actually, let's change this to say, something with transparency, and I'm going to change it back to white. Why not? Great. Wait. That's interesting. Why did it do that? Huh, interesting. I hate it when AutoCAD does this. It makes me look silly. Huh, maybe it was just the way that it was rendering. Yeah, or maybe not. I don't know. Who knows? Sometimes AutoCAD gets fussy. Okay. You also have viewport freeze over here. We're not going to get into that. That's for when you have viewports. The other thing that you can do is turn things on and off. So let's say that I don't want to see this anymore. I can turn it off by clicking on the light bulb. But if you recall, I'm not a big fan of the light bulb. I prefer to use a freeze where it's actually removing it from memory so that the computer stops having to process it. And if you have an old laptop like I do, that can help. Plotting layers, you can change the plot whether they're layer plots or not. So that means if you do or don't want to see it on a drawing, and that's to do with paper space, which is something that we'll get into at a later date. You can also lock a layer. So let's say that I don't want to be able to move this anymore. Maybe it's a guide for something. If I click on that lock button, I can no longer move this layer. I try to select it, it won't let me. And we can use this pretty strategically. Like let's say that we've drawn something that is going to stay there for forever. We don't want it to move. We can just lock it while we're working around it so we don't accidentally change things. So that's the basics of it. You can change the visual stuff. You can turn things on and off. The status tells you whether or not there's stuff on it and what kinds of stuff. If I'm honest, that's a bunch of information that I don't really pay attention to. But let's talk about this for a second. So on your Properties tab, it is entirely possible to change how these things look individually. So let's say that I select that and I click on here and I change to continuous. If I then go back to this and draw another line, these two things are now on the same layer, but the line types are different. You want to be careful about that because you might confuse yourself down the line. So best practice is to leave everything as by layer, and if you need to change something, give it a new layer because it has some kind of different meaning, right? Something else you want to be really careful of is if I have nothing selected and I change this to this, I have in fact changed my, I've changed the thing that I'm drawing with, but I haven't changed the layer. This can be really confusing as well, and it can have some really bad, trickle down consequences if your layers are no longer behaving the way that you think your layers should. So you want to be really careful, and I would say don't do that. This, when you click out of it, this should always say by layer. And you'll notice that I changed that back and it didn't change it here. So everything should be by layer, pretty much always. That said, you will absolutely see me fussing with it sometimes to try to do something weird, but in general, by layer, by layer, by layer, by layer. Okay, so it's nice to think about that kind of stuff, but practically speaking, what does our layer structure look like? Well, for me, there's a few things that I have. Let's switch over to a different drawing. The first one is that I have a template that brings in layers that I know that I'm going to use all the time. And because I know that my end goal is plating, I have a bunch of layers that I use specifically for plating. And you can see those when you actually go to a plate. Whoa. And, this is my viewport layer. There's layers for notes and whatnot, title blocks, all the things. Okay, I also typically bring in a locator, and this goes at the 0, 0 point for my architecture, and I use this as just as a way so that I can click to the 0, 0, 0 of my space relative to, other stuff. However, typically this is on a locked layer. So right now I could move this and then accidentally select something that isn't at the 0, 0, 0. So I'm going to lock that like that, which means that I can't accidentally move this, even if I tried, which is fantastic. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is just your standard 4x8 flat, and it does, or at least it should, yeah, it does. It has a rectangle for the skin, and that's something where maybe I want to plate that separately. So let's say that for this drawing, I actually want 2 layers, 1 layer for the skin, 1 layer for the frame. So I'm going to create a new drawing, a new layer, and I'm going to have, since I have 0, 0 selected, I'm just going to click that, and it's going to duplicate whichever layer is, whatever the current layer is exactly. So if you have different settings, it's going to change those settings based on, or it's going to adopt those settings based on that change. So for example, if I did a new layer based on locator, that new layer would also be locked and would be red. I'm going to delete that layer. Okay, there's the new layer that I created a second ago. I can just click and then wait for a second for it to let me edit it. And I'm going to name it dash flat in all caps. The all caps don't matter relative to the computer. It does matter relative to how I view it. So I'm going to say flat, and this is good, and then skin. Great. And then I'm going to give it a different color, just so that I can, mentally differentiate easily. And then I'm going to put the thing that I want on that layer onto that layer, like that. And I'm going to change the layer to, where did it go? Aha, it's up. Flat skin, right there. So you'll notice that you can't really see it. You can if you super scroll in. I don't know if you can even tell, but that's ever so slightly greenish. That's one of the challenges, that is a challenge that we tend to face, is that sometimes we can't see the lines that we've drawn, but whatever. Okay, oh, I should have made the layer first. Let's see if it'll let me do it. The next thing I'm going to do is put all of the framing onto its own layer as well. So I'm going to duplicate that last one. I'm going to name it dash flat, and then I'm going to name, then give it the frame title, and I'm going to do blue. Why not? And then all that stuff that I just selected, still on layer 0, and I'm going to move it to frame. So what that lets me do is it lets me use some of my visibility settings. So let's say I want to freeze it so that I only see the skin. Well, I can type freeze, spacebar, and I click it, and all of the framing goes away. If I want to thaw it, I can just type thaw, and it brings back everything. If my drawing is super complicated, thaw has limited usability in my opinion. And then let's go take a look at what happens on the menu. So when I froze it using the freeze, it disappeared here as well. I can also just click on these. So if I know what they are, I can just say, I don't want to see that right now, and it goes away. You can also do some more fine workspace management using hide objects. So this lets me just go in and click and say which things I don't want to see. The opposite of that is unhide. Or you can say, let's say that I only want to see these 3 pieces. I could say isolate objects, and everything else disappears. This lets you go in and see only what you want to see, or get rid of things that you don't want to see or aren't relevant at any given moment. And particularly in 3D drafting, this becomes really, really useful. So much so that I have hotkeys for it so that they are under my left hand all the time. And to reverse it, I just say unisolate, and everything comes back. So let's look at a slightly more complicated example. Let's say that we have a flat that has a bunch of different molding on it, and the molding is different stuff. So we want to make sure that we have those listed as different things. So here you can see that I've named everything. Whoop. Wow, good job, me. I've named everything something logical based on the unit that it's attached to. But then I can go in and across my different views, I can see what those things, things are. So if I want to freeze the frame here, I can click here, freeze that frame, is that I'm on that. You can't freeze a layer that you're on. So I'm going to click back to the 0, freeze it, and the frame here will go away as well as the frame here. Nice. So now the only thing that I see is the different iterations and the different views of the skin. You'll notice that this wasn't in the this wasn't on the correct layer, which meant that it didn't disappear. So let me just go ahead and put that on the correct layer. So that is what is this? This is frame. Go down here, click. Oh, by the way, when you click this, you'll notice that I don't see all of that stuff that started with the dash. That's a tool that I use so that I always know which direction to scroll. So when I click on it, I scroll up and I'm going to units. I scroll down and I'm going to other stuff. This is my part of my frame. And it's going to warn me that I put it onto a layer that's frozen. Not a big deal. Great. And then if I want to see that again, I can either thaw the whole thing, or I can just unclick this here. Great. That's about it. I hope that helps. Just get in there, start playing with layers, and see what works for you, and see if you can figure out exactly how they work. AutoCAD Help has some really great articles about this, and I would strongly recommend that you play with them. All right, if you have questions, let me know. And in the meantime, see you later.